All right. Anybody? So, tonight's session, I think, is probably going to be relatively short. So, the way that this is going to kind of work this evening is it's going to be like a kind of like a question answer type thing, and that's not going to take very long. So, I want to do two things before we get started with that. Number one would be. Hello, are y'all coming in? Okay. Oh, you're coming in.
I'm coming in now.
Wait, I'm the twin? Oh, you're yeah, y'all are brother and sister. I always forget that the family tree at Central is more like a stick. It's not like there's not a lot of branches here. Like everywhere you look, there's.
A direct connection.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of like the one that like when I found out about it, I was just like, what? Oh yeah. So did y'all know? Y'all know this. I know y'all know this. But it took me like probably 7 years. Patty Calcote, Terry Folden, and Carl Petrie, siblings. Shocking? Shocking to anybody? Shocking to me.
It's shocking to me considering we're new here. So
And you don't know those people.
I don't know
There
it.
you
I
go.
don't know that fact.
There you go. No, yeah. When I like learned all that, I was like, what? So, anyways, if you have a shocking family tie, then you can share that at any time that you want to.
Kevin Tinsley's my fourth cousin.
Who is?
Kevin Tinsley.
Is your fourth cousin? Don't advertise that. I like Kevin.
The way we found out was he showed up on suggested friends on Facebook.
Wait, how would you even tie like that fourth cousin? That's so far down the tree. I don't even know how you track that. I don't even know what that means.
Well, his grandpa is my second cousin.
Okay, hold on. I'm gonna track this. Your second cousin, so that means that his grandpa is your cousin's child, your first cousin's child, right?
I'm lost.
Isn't that how you get a second cousin?
I don't know.
Isn't that right?
I think I usually just say, "Oh, that's my cousin." Then you're just like,
Yeah, but
really
at some point in
specify.
time, somebody's so far removed that you're just like, yeah, I don't know. They're not in my 150. They're not in my circle. Yeah, right. Like that's how you get a second cousin. Like once your first cousin, so like once your aunt or uncle has a kid, that's your first cousin.
Mhm.
And then once they
Oh, it's
have,
for the group.
The kid.
Well,
If nobody eats them, I'm gonna eat them all.
I didn't get one.
then once they have a kid, that's your second cousin,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Is it your second cousin or is it your
I'm out.
kid's
No,
second?
they're peanut butter. They're off the chain.
Are they store bought or?
I don't know.
You
They're
like peanut butter?
fantastic.
How long in a cookie?
Oh, that's a great question, Rebecca.
Yeah.
Okay, I was.
That's a pretty dang good peanut butter. I'm not a fan of peanut butter cookies. That's a good peanut butter cookie.
I'll try one.
Wow. Wow. That was good.
I'm not. I might have to run back across the hall.
That is really good.
Yes.
I'm fine, thank you.
Do you have any milk?
Okay. I might be a peanut butter cookie fan now.
Rebecca.
No, thank you.
It'd be disgrace to like cheat on your cookies, probably.
No, I have one of those chocolate chip and one of those peanut butter. Yeah.
I missed the chocolate chip.
Are you judgmental when you eat other people's cookies?
You're like,
I would be.
no, I like food, so I really appreciate it when people take the time to make something.
Okay. Well, I feel like a bad person.
Zach,
'cause I totally
is,
agree.
Zach is
I've judged the
definitely
restaurant's food when I go
critical
out.
of other coffee.
Eat,
He
like,
drinks this, he's like,
Mainly barbecue joints, like I can do better.
Man, I used to think I could do better than some barbecue joints, but my
Yeah.
last two briskets have sucked.
But yeah.
They've been terrible.
And you should try Brandon's. They're so good.
I would.
we go to
I've
like
been
a
invited to try.
But let's try this
And he
coffee.
makes the best steak.
No, I got to beat on the
Yeah,
steak.
no, I don't think so.
I got to beat on the steak.
I don't think so.
I have very, like, I might be overconfident on my steak ability.
We should have a competition one day.
You did?
Hey, you know what we are going to do? This is on the, we got to get started. I'm just rambling now. But we are going to, I think, this summer, do a brisket cook-off and see who can smoke.
Daniel just got excited.
Owl doesn't count.
Or consider I can like cook like 5
I will
dishes at
win.
once because
Owl
I
will
get
win. He can be a
multiple
judge.
No.
like entries.
You can do one entry,
One.
but we're going to call it smoked meat, not weed. I'm just kidding. Let's make that up. That's really not what we're going to call it. That'd be funny. Have shirts. Okay.
Smoke weed, not crack.
There's no
Yes.
way. There's no way you can smoke a brisket better than Al.
I just said that my brisket sucked. My last two it sucked. I thought I was on that Al Lambert game, and then my last two have been terrible. So, but I put my steak up against it. So I use his steak recipe actually. So I don't know if that. Anyways,
I'm gonna need that.
I gotta get focused.
Let's go.
One of the projects that kind of takes us back to our three God is statements. And before we kind of get into some of this stuff tonight, into some of the assessment, hopefully, that I spent some time with over the course of the last week, this project of God's character, that He is spirit, meaning that that's how He exists. He is not bound by a body, and therefore whatever is possible for a maximally powerful spirit is possible with God. And so again, we don't have to concern ourselves with questions like, can God create a stone that He cannot lift? Or something like that. There's always somebody, not in this room necessarily, but there's always somebody out there who's going to be like, oh man, I got a question for you Christians. And it's like, okay, shoot. And there's like, something like that. And the fact of the matter is, it's like, I don't know. I don't know if He can or not. I just know that if it is possible for a maximally powerful spirit, then it's possible for God. If it's not possible for a maximally powerful spirit, it's not possible with God. So it's okay. Like I'm not stressed. I'm not up at night like that dang philosopher got me. I don't know that rock question is just going to be in my mind for the rest of my life now. I'm never going to be able to get over this one. And so that's where the whole God is spirit thing comes in. God is light is the idea that in Him there is no darkness, and there's not darkness simply because we got to be careful how we think about perfection. Oftentimes, and this is a real problem for us as Baptists. I hear us making this statement all the time, and I honestly think that it's just because I think that we as Baptists do a really good job of learning the Bible. I don't know if we do a really good job of really trying to process what the Bible is saying. And, I think that we as Baptists have probably, have, as a denomination, have more mastery over, stories in the Bible and different things that the Bible says. But it's like, okay, but what is the philosophical implication of this idea that is being shared here? And that's where we get really, really weak because, and I'll say this, and this applies for myself too, our seminaries don't teach philosophy. If you were a theologian in the first 300 years of the church, you were a philosopher first, a theologian second. Philosophy was just something that was like inherent in the studies. And so as a result for us, in my own education, in Mike's education, in all of our education, like if we're going to become, critically deep thinkers, then a lot of that's going to have to happen outside of the seminary classroom and kind of getting some of our own understanding and teaching. And I'm sharing some opinion with that. Like I'm sure these things are on YouTube. Hi YouTube. I didn't know people were watching these until I got some comments last few weeks. I was like, oh man, okay, got to straighten up there. But I think that there's probably be some people that if they heard me say that, they'd be, oh, that's just false. It's like, look, you go and you try to start reading some of the early church fathers, the apostolic fathers, the patristic fathers, and you just realize very quickly there's a major difference between me and them. There's a major difference in their training and my training. There's a major difference in their intellect and my intellect, and I think this thing can be said for many theologians, modern theologians, especially in the American church. And so, we just don't think robustly about a lot of these things that the Bible says. I think we have a mastery of knowing what's in the Bible. I don't think that we have a mastery of understanding the nuances of what they might mean. And so when we say that God is perfect, like our go-to answer for us as Baptists, 9 times out of 10, is like, well, He's sinless. Good job, right? Like slow clap for everybody in the room who wants to say that. But then we have to take it a step deeper. Okay, why is He sinless? That's just not His character. Fantastic. Then what is His character? Like all these answers that we typically offer up, they're not getting us to the root answer. And the root answer is God is light. Meaning He is so filled with virtue. He's perfect in virtue. That there is no room for sin in Him. So people may ask the question, well, how is it that the angels fell? Here's a good question. How is it that at one point in time God had a perfect creation? Angels, he created angels. And a third of those angels rebelled against him. How can we know that we won't do that someday in the future when we get to heaven? I think that's a very good question. Well, the answer is really simple. When God made the angels, he didn't make them perfect. He made them very much like us, innocent. And virtue was something that had to be established within those angels. And the minute that those angels quit working towards virtue, they rebelled and there was a great fall. In the same way in the garden, he didn't make Adam and Eve perfect. Virtue was something that they were still striving for when the first temptation came, and they fell to that temptation. Why? Because they weren't perfect in virtue yet. God is perfect in virtue. And so in him, there's nothing but light. He is morally good, and that's why there is no sin in him. And then this final thing right here, this is the kicker for tonight. All right? God is spirit. We got to understand his power. God is light. We got to understand his goodness. God is love. We got to understand his posture towards us. And one of the great projects of guys like Dallas Willard, Richard Foster, in the 80s and 90s. Now, fast forward 30, 40 years, you look at guys like John Mark Comer. Trying to think of some other names that are kind of coming to mind right now. And there's just none coming to mind. I know that they're out there. Golly, the brothers. Gavin. Y'all know who I'm talking about, don't you? Somebody just go ahead and shout it out. I know it's on the tip of your tongue. Gavin Ortland. Yes, maybe. But like some of the projects of some of these guys, they're kind of going back to these C.S. Lewis, Dallas Willard, Richard Foster roots, and trying to help people understand that God's posture towards people is not one of hate. It's not one of animosity, and it's not one where God is like looking at people and like, oh, there's my enemy. It's a posture of love. Now, does that mean that people are not enemies of God? No, like people are enemies of God, but it's possible to be an enemy, and the enemy only goes one way. Let me explain that just for a second, right? You have a parent, a good parent, a loving parent, who disciplines their child. Let's say it's an adult child, or like an 18, 19-year-old child, something like that. And that child is off at, we'll pick a really bad university so that way we can all be in agreement, like Texas A&M. That child goes off to Texas A&M where the education is terrible and things like that. But they chose it, and so like the parents are like, you know what, I guess I'm going to send my kid to that hellhole and it'll be okay. And so anyways, that kid ends up rebelling against, their family by doing what Aggies do. I don't know. And Brian, what do Aggies do? Do they...
Not the same thing that your school does.
No, but anyways, they end up rebelling against their family, and so the family's like, hey, we're going to cut you off. Like, we're not going to just continue to feed your bad habits. We're going to cut you off. Like, you're no longer going to be funded so that way you can go party or whatever. That's something that is fairly common in our culture today. Okay, well, now why is that parent doing that? That parent is doing that because they love their child. What is the response of the child oftentimes? Well, now my parent is my enemy. You'll see the difference there? There is this kind of conflict there, and there certainly is the idea that there is an enemy present, but it's coming from one direction, not the other. The one direction, the direction of the parent is, no, you're receiving punishment, you're receiving discipline because of love. The other one is saying, no, I'm telling you that you're my enemy because I'm receiving the discipline. And that's where the conflict comes into play with us and God before we become Christians, and sometimes even while we are Christians. We'll talk about that here tonight. And so the project of these guys in recent years has been the project of Christians throughout Christian history. There was a medieval period. We always I don't know, I'm a dude. And dude, thank you, Ryan, for affirming that. I'm a dude, and when I was growing up, I always thought that the period of the Knights was the greatest period ever. I don't know. We only have 3. Any semblance there, or is that just me? All right, cool. Okay.
Yeah. Give me a chance to respond.
Okay, sorry. You're just kind of looking at me like, no.
I was waiting for the opportune moment to respond.
How did you feel about the medieval period growing up?
I thought it was really cool.
Boom. Yes.
I want to be a knight.
You got it? Yeah.
Medieval times was awesome.
Medieval times, yeah. Right, like you go to medieval times with your parents, you're eating chicken with your hands, and you're just like, this is the greatest day ever. I don't have any silverware. I don't even have to worry about a napkin, and you're seeing these dudes fight on horses with armor and stuff. Like, you're just like, hey. The unfortunate thing is that the medieval period was like the worst period for theology in pretty much Christian history. It sucked. I mean, there was like pretty much nothing good came out of that time period. And a lot of what the Reformation tried to do was to correct some of the ideas and thoughts that came out of that period. But outside of that, and I'm sure that there were some good guys in the medieval period. I'm sure that was out there, but you just don't hear about them very much. But the project of many Christians all throughout the last 2,000 years is to draw people back to this idea that, hey, God is for you. The first mover, the reason that the cross happened was because of love. Like something, one characteristic of God, one posture of God towards you took precedent over all the other positions and characteristics. He could have chose wrath, we would have never got the cross. He could have chose judgment, we would have never got the cross. He could have chose just a perpetual state of discipline. We would have never had the cross. Instead, what did he choose? He chose love. That was the first mover. That's the root characteristic of God. And so, like the project of spiritual formation is just to reconnect us to that, to where we become a people at our heart that our posture towards God is one of love. And if you read the book of 1 John, it's a good read. It's a tough read. It's a beautiful read, but it's a tough read. And what does 1 John, what does that letter say? It basically says, like, hey, love and obedience, these two things work hand in hand. If we say that we love God, but we don't obey Him, do we really love Him? If we say that we love Him and we obey Him, that's the display. That's how this thing gets worked out. So the work of spiritual formation is those steps of obedience that are so hard. And some of them are mundane. Some, I think oftentimes we put ourselves, I do this, put ourselves in the position of like, okay, what is the big step of obedience? And oftentimes it's just like, hey, what is the daily grind? Am I willing to get up on a Friday morning and get into the Word, get into prayer, and then go love my wife the way that Christ loves the church, go love my kids the way that Christ is loving me, go love my coworkers, go love my church, go love the people in Jackson, whatever the case may be. So it's oftentimes those mundane things where we're becoming people of love. We are assuming on ourselves the posture of Jesus Christ, and it's a lifelong work. It's a lifelong work, and it's hard. And so I just want to remind y'all of that with this session today, that all of this that we're doing, it's just so that way we can become people of love. Like we're not trying to become people of judgment. We're not trying to become people of wrath. We're not trying to become people of condemnation. Whether that's condemnation for ourselves or for other people, we're trying to become people of love because that's God's posture towards us. So it's a very beautiful thing that we're doing here, even though it may be difficult. So with all that being said, let's talk about the last week. Did anybody have any experiences, whether it be in your prayer life, doing some of your homework, anything like that? We kind of gave almost 2 things of homework where I encourage you once again to make that list of people. But also we talked about some of the things that are going to prep us for tonight's session as we kind of talk about confession on a practical level. Did anybody have anything that you wanted to share? Any feedback, thoughts, comments, questions, whatever? I'll make sure I get time. What y'all got? Okay.
I guess I'll say something. I did pray a couple times about God leading me to someone to confide into.
Yeah.
Don't know if I'm receptive,
Okay.
or don't even know what to look for, or maybe he's like, I don't even know if God's given the answer yet, or maybe
That's okay.
there isn't one.
That's okay. Keep showing up. That would be my encouragement to you. If you don't have clarity, God will bring that. Keep showing up. Keep showing up in that prayer life. Keep showing up in that meditation life. It's going to get there right now. So good for you for praying through that and trying to seek that. I think God will honor that. Anybody else? Any other thoughts from this last week? Okay, well. let's talk some of just like the practical things when it comes to confession. Now, I want to give a statement that I agree with, and then I want to give a boundary that spins off of that statement that I am currently wrestling with from a belief perspective. Okay, and so I think that but I will say this with a lot of confidence. I think that the boundary that I'm going to give for this kind of belief perspective, I think that the answer is going to be somewhere within this boundary. Like I can give you a lot of confidence for that. So I think one of the primary goals of confession, as we read last week, is to take our brokenness, bring it to the light, so that way we can experience healing. That is the primary goal of confession. Where do I get that from? There's a number of verses that we read last week, but I think one of the biggest ones that we read last week is James 5:16. Therefore confess your sin to one another and pray for each other so that you may be healed. The word healed there is the exact same word that many people use for saved, and primarily within the context of Jesus coming in and saving or healing somebody that was sick. And so essentially what you have here is like, hey, we bring this stuff from the darkness to the light for the purpose of being saved, healed. And when I say saved, I'm not talking about so we can go to heaven. I'm talking about I've got brokenness and I need the brokenness fixed, right? And so I think that one of the statements that I have heard about confession that I think is really positive is the idea of being fully known and fully loved. That's what we're working towards. And I think that there is a boundary within this. All right, now let's talk about the extreme edge of the boundary first. Let's talk about hey, the boundary will not exceed this over here. The extreme edge of the boundary is going to be promulgated by people like John Mark Comer, like Jenny Allen. I don't know if y'all do a lot of our Bible studies here at the church, but she talks about this pretty openly. And there's a guy named Justin Earley who's becoming more popular right now with spiritual disciplines. He uses the phrase, I think John Mark Comer uses the phrase, to be deeply known and deeply loved. Justin Earley actually uses the phrase to be, I just forgot the phrase, fully known and fully loved. And so, what they're going to say is hey, anything that you got, it don't matter if it's a sin, it don't matter if it's a struggle, it doesn't matter if it's a temptation, it does not matter. It does not matter if you're entertaining it or not, get it out there. Get it out there so that way people can pray for it, people can speak to it, and all those things like that. Now, you will not see that, I don't think, in the majority of Christians. But I'm just going to go ahead and throw something out there. And by the way, you're not going to see that in me. I don't think that I am full. One of my big problems in life is just intrusive thoughts. I don't share those things. I kind of plan out is this something that I'm actually sinning on, or am I not sinning on it? If I'm not sinning on it, I tend to keep it to myself. If I am sinning on it, then I tend to get it out there. But I think that I can say though, because I'm sharing that about myself because I don't want to be a hypocrite here with you guys, but at the same time, I think that I have to acknowledge that when I look at people like John Mark Comer, Justin Earley, and Jenny Allen, we see some really good people that seem to be walking in a lot of freedom, seem to be walking in a lot of security. So that's going to be the extreme end of confession. Everything that comes in this noggin comes out of this mouth in front of somebody else. All right? Extreme end. Now let's go to the other end, and this is where it's not the extreme end, but it's going to be the end where we have got to stop. Because the other extreme end is, no, you can just bring that confession to God. That we saw last week, that is not acceptable. You can't, I'm sorry, the Bible does not leave room for us as Baptists to stay in our solo bubble and go to our closet and confess our sin to God and just leave it at that. The Bible does not give us that kind of freedom and flexibility. It just doesn't. So, the spectrum that we're going to work with tonight, you have the extreme side. Now let's come to the not extreme side, but let's just come to where we have to stop. Is, hey, if you have a sin that is causing you torment and is providing brokenness actively in your life right now, you got to get it out. You got to get it out. And that's our spectrum. The one side, everything comes out. The other side, hey, what is causing you the most brokenness right now? Get that thing out, okay? And so there are so many nuanced things that we could deal with. I'll tell you one of the things that I like is the Anglican Church. They have a phrase where they say confession. It is encouraged to all, needed by some, mandated on none. All right? Encouraged to all, needed by some, mandated to none. The Catholic Church, their view on confession is going to be they have what they call venial sins and mortal sins. And if you have committed a mortal sin, and I'm not super familiar with the mortal sins, I think the mortal sins are basically all the sins that show up in Paul's lists. And so like if you have committed a mortal sin, then you go and you share that sin. But if it's a venial sin, they tell you, they're very clear about this. If it's a venial sin, confess it to God and move on about your day. If it's a mortal sin, go and confess it to a priest, and then there's kind of absolution. The Eastern Orthodox Church is going to fall kind of on the more radical side, except for they don't quite go as far as, like, say, John Mark Comer does. They're going to say, hey, any sin that you got, confess it, but you only confess sins. You're not confessing temptation that you fought. You're not confessing inner struggles and things like that. You're just going and you're confessing the thing that you actually failed to. But they would say, hey, but you're going to get it all out there. And they have some pretty regimented ways of which that gets kind of worked out on a practical level. So, I mean, I just shared with you a number of ways that people kind of work within that boundary that I gave. But like I said, the important thing is understand the boundary's not going to go any further this way radically, but it can't go any further this way. We have to talk about this. So let's talk about just some common questions that people have about stuff. So does confession have to be shared with more than one person? I hear this question a whole lot. Here's my answer: no. All right. I do think. So let's go over here to that extreme side again, and that's kind of going to be where we are. In fact, I'm even going to give you a beautiful visual. All right. When I'm standing over here, I'm talking extreme side. When I'm standing over here, I'm talking less extreme side. Y'all with me? When I'm in the middle, I may have just forgotten to go to a side. So when people come with this thing right here, like I get this, right? When you're coming with something so personal as your sin, which is oftentimes embarrassing, you're kind of thinking to yourself, hey, I don't want this going around to everybody. I would really like for it to be maybe one. I really like for it to be no person, but I really like, if I have to, I'd really like for it to be one person. On the extreme side of things, I would say, hey, remember that group of 3 to 5 people? It is not bad. I would say it's a good thing, even though this would be something I don't practice myself, but I can acknowledge, even though I'm not practicing it, that it's a good thing. I would say that it would be a good thing to have those 3 to 5 people involved in some of those things. But on the flip side of it, I think that you see this necessity for at least one person. Now, why do I say that? Because in Matthew chapter 18, when we talked about church discipline last week, what does Matthew chapter 18 tell us when we talk about church discipline? It says, hey, if your brother has sinned against you, you go to him and confront him. And if he repents right there, boom, we're done, right? So what do we have in that situation? We have one person with one person. They're resolving their conflict. Nobody else has to be involved. All right, if that person does not resolve that conflict there, that's when we bring in the 3 people. And that's when the group gets a little bit larger and so on and so forth. And so I would say that if we're talking about mandates, the mandate is find that person, but be willing to bring in more people as necessary. All right, any questions about that before we move on? Any questions? Okay, so let's talk about this person right here. Let's talk about like the kind of person that you need to be confessed and sent to. Number 1, James 5:16 says that it's the prayers of a righteous person. Okay, one of the things I can vividly remember in college, and it wasn't a bad thing, right? Like, I mean, I used to be a lot more critical of it than I am now. What I need to acknowledge is that in college there was budding relationships and budding maturity that, if given enough time, there would have been a really good person there and me where we could confess into. But at the time, like, it was basically like a bunch of guys that were like getting together who were all struggling with, the same type stuff and just couldn't, we're confessing our sin to each other, but there was no wisdom that was being brought to the table. Why? Because all of us were kind of struggling with it. I don't know that any of us we're righteous in the sense that, hey, that guy over there can actually help me get through this sin, or I can help him get through this sin, or so on and so forth. You see that with a lot of college ministries, unfortunately. You see it with a lot of student ministries, unfortunately, where like people are like, okay, I'm going to choose blank person over here. That's going to be my accountability partner, but the accountability partner is not somebody who can actually help. So what do we need? We need righteous people. What is a righteous person? It's not a perfect person. A righteous person is somebody who is actively in pursuit of God and actively in pursuit of total surrender. You remember, we've talked about surrender. Surrender is a hard thing. And it may be for many of us, I don't know. The goal is that like we reach this level of surrender where we're just like, hey, like we're very mature in it. But to be completely surrendered on this, I don't even know if it's possible. Maybe it is, maybe it's not, I don't know. So you need to at least find somebody who is in active, honest pursuit of God and active, honest pursuit of surrender. That is a righteous person. So I'll just share like a personal anecdote with me. I used to have a guy, and I love this guy. Best man in my wedding. We still talk all the time. I probably talk to him as much as I do all of my good friends. And I have lots of good friends. I don't have just one. He is one of many. But he was somebody that I confessed a lot of sin to over the years. And I'm talking about deeply, deeply personal stuff. That, I was just like, man, like this, I want to deal with this with him and nobody else. And there was a long time during that period where like that relationship was very strong and it was very healthy for me. But then there came a time, and I saw it coming, and I started praying, God, please turn him around, have him repent, because I don't want to start this thing over with somebody else. And unfortunately, that's just not what happened. Like I still think that he is a great guy, and I think that he's in pursuit of God. But at this point in time, he and I are like in two very different places, at the very least theologically speaking. And so it just became evident to me over a period of time, like, okay, like I'm gonna have to go find somebody else. And that was a hard thing for me. And that's kind of when I go back to that story that I shared with y'all about Rick, who is the guy that I confess sin to now. When I'm praying, I'm just like, okay, who is it? And then I'm like, okay, what is it that I need to be telling him? And essentially, I'll tell you, just in complete honesty, my prayer was when God made it so clear that Rick was the guy that I needed to confess into. My prayer was like, God, do I have to start over, or can I just like start where I am now? Do I have to rehash all the things that I've talked to this other guy about, or like can I just kind of start like where I am today? And that's when God showed up with that phone call, and I was like, okay, like I need to share with him all the things. And so like there's going to be times, unfortunately, where that may happen for some people. I don't think that is the common thing. I really don't think that that's the common practice that you're going to experience. I think that if you will choose the right person the first time, I think that you're going to find, okay, this is going to be something that can last me potentially the rest of my life. So righteous person who's in pursuit of God, person who's in pursuit of surrender. And then I would add one final thing to this. This unfortunately for us in a Baptist church, this is going to be hard for you to find, okay? This is going to be hard for you to find. But it's not going to be impossible for you to find. If you can find somebody who has had to sit across a table, a space, whatever, from somebody else and confess sin to that person, if you can find somebody who has been in the chair of the person confessing sin, you got you a good one. But like I said, for us as Baptists, we are so isolated and introverted in our spiritual disciplines that's not something that's very common for us to find, so it may be hard. But if you can find that person that has shared the tough thing with somebody before, you're going to find somebody who is a really, really good partner in confession and prayer. So any thoughts, comments, questions on the type of person that you're kind of looking for there? Man, either I'm just killing this thing on the teaching side. I'm going to assume that this is just, or y'all are just hush mouth. That's okay.
My biggest question about like finding the right person
Yeah.
or picking the right person is just like, does it have to be? I mean, like, can your confession person just be like your regular best friend?
100%. That's the idea.
It doesn't have to be like someone that's specifically just your confession partner.
Yes. 100%, that is the goal. That is the goal, but that's not the reality for
For
everybody.
a lot of people, yeah.
Unfortunately, there's lots of people who have like their inner circle. They're like 3 to 5 people who couldn't even like begin to comprehend why it's necessary to confess Him. And so, if you find yourself in that situation where you have a very close friend where you can confess into, then like go home tonight and like throw your hands. God, you're the best. If that's not you, then I'm just kind of giving you some principles that you can work with. But yeah, I think that's a very good comment there.
And
Rachel,
with
about
that, just like, I mean, like, you know, sometimes I think, like, should it be a person that's 10 years ahead of me in life and, you know, has can, like, mentor me, but,
Mhm.
or can it just be, like, the person who's doing the same thing I'm doing every day? We're both struggling, but we're trying.
Yeah, I think that mentors are really good, and I think that mentors ought to be let in on some of the things that we're struggling with, if not all the things that we're struggling with.
So they're like a second confession partner, like if you feel comfortable with
Yeah, but I think that like you got to know you, right? Like, and if you're in this place, it is okay for you to be honest with yourself and say, I am so weak. And so for me to go get somebody that's on the same level as me, it's just not going to be helpful. But if you can say, you know what, like I'm not perfect, but like I am in pursuit of righteousness and I am in pursuit of surrender, so I am going to go find somebody who's in a similar. That's okay. It is not a prideful thing to be able to acknowledge where you are and who you are. Does that make sense? So, like, I think that if like you can acknowledge where you are and who you are, and it's a relatively good thing, and you want to go find somebody that's in like same stage of life, whatever, go do it. And that's why I'm saying that like the best friend thing or close friend. I actually kind of reject the phrase best friends. We can get on that tangent later, but if we have time, I'll get at it. I hate the phrase best friends. It's the
my
worst.
bestie. Like, what do you say?
I'll get to that in just a second. But you know, like the whole like close friends thing would be like that would be the ideal. And so if you've got that, go run with it. If anybody in here's got that, go run with it. Any other thoughts? Really good questions there. Any thoughts, questions there before we move on to the next one?
I have a question.
Yeah.
It could be me and my ignorance that's thinking this, or you might have mentioned it last week.
Yeah, it's okay.
Here. So is it sounds like, okay, so I do confession. That's something I've been practicing for a while, and it is like mutual confession.
Yes.
But is that how it's supposed to be?
Yeah.
Or will it sometimes look like you're confessing to somebody else that might, you know, like a mentor who might not be,
Yeah.
obviously.
Yeah, so I think that in the ideal scenario, it's a mutual confession. Now, for me, where I'm at today, like I'm confessing my sin to a mentor, and sometimes he confesses sin back to me. It's rare though. And I will say this about this particular guy: like he's the closest thing to Jesus I know. And so, like, and I don't say that like trying to, you know, pump him up or whatever. He ain't gonna be watching this on YouTube. I don't even know if he knows how to work YouTube. But you know, like he's the closest person to Jesus that I know. And so, like when he does say something, I'm just like, what? Like there's no way, you know. But that's me, and that's who God led me to at this season of my life. And one thing that I'll say that he has been praying for me, and that I've been praying for me, is that I would have that established locally and with some peers that are my age. So I think that in the ideal world, you have very close friends, you have mutual confession going on, there's mutual prayer, and there's mutual pursuit of Jesus. So I think that's right on the money. Yeah. Again, there's boundaries on this thing. You know, I personally think that there's boundaries on this thing. Any other thoughts, questions before we move to the next one? Okay. How much detail needs to be confessed? So let's give our boundaries, okay? You have to do this. I've got to know how to pray for you. I've got to know how to pray for you. So that's the boundary that we're not going to go any further this way. It could get more extreme than that, but we're gonna stop here. On this side, we get it all out, right? And again, I think that like we got to be able to follow convictions. And I even was talking with a buddy of mine the other day, pastor, and I was talking about a situation here at the church, and the guy said, "Hey, is this guy that you're describing?" This is my pastor buddy. He's like, "Is this guy that you're describing? How is his conscience?" And he said, "Because if I was in this guy's shoes, I would be like really struggling right now." He's like, "But I can see where he may not." And so like I started kind of thinking, I'm like, man, yeah, that's exactly right. Like I'm one of these guys with like this very heavy, guilty conscience, kind of like my pastor friend. And so as a result of that, you know, we just gotta know ourselves and know what needs to be said in order for healing to be experienced. So like there's the boundary, right? On this extreme side, hey, get it all out, all the details and stuff like that. The only thing I would say with details is the Galatians 5. I think the Galatians 5 passage. Let me look it up real fast. I'm sorry. Galatians 6. Brothers, if anyone is caught in any transgression, you who are spiritual should restore him in a spirit of gentleness. And then it says, keep watch on yourself lest you too be tempted. So the temptation that could happen with oversharing is that you all of a sudden now could catch your buddy in something with the amount of details that you're sharing. So like that needs to be a part of the relationship. It's like, hey, can you tell me when you've got enough? You know, like can you tell me when you know how to pray for me, or when this becomes a struggle for you? Because so like I said, like there's our spectrum. There's some things to kind of take care of. Any thoughts, questions about this right here? Any thoughts, questions? All right. Does confession have to be face to face? Ideal world, yes. But if the person that is going to be the best person for you to confess into, it can't be done face to face, then do it however you can, right? But ideal world, let's just go ahead and acknowledge face to face is the best policy. But I know some people that like they do better confessing sin when they write it down and they're able to just share like, hey, here's the written confession, or maybe talking on the phone, or leaving 8-minute. These things are the worst, but like those stupid voice, messages and stuff like that. Golly.
I know Brandon.
My record is 17 minutes.
Your record is 17 minutes?
You can Emily get on. It's like a mini podcast episode.
That is a podcast. It's not a mini podcast. That's a podcast episode. So anyways, like the deal would be, again, we're trying to give you an ideal scenario potentially. Ideal scenario would be, yeah, I'm face to face with somebody, but do it however you can. And I do think that like in the back of our mind, we ought to have that perspective of I'm working towards the ideal. And so anyways, any thoughts, questions on that? Okay. What if I've confessed something to God and do not feel the conviction or need to confess to someone else? You're okay. I mean, you're okay. You just got to be really honest with yourself about this, right? Like if it keeps on coming back, and you have no peace, well then do what you got to do. But at the same time, I think that one of the reasons that the Catholic Church has separated venial from mortal is because they acknowledge like, yeah, there's some things that like people do, they confess it to God, and like it's done. It's done. Like it's there, and so now like we don't need to like burden them any further or something along those lines. So yeah, I think that it can be okay, but we got to be brutally honest with ourselves, and we got to remember that we are very good at hiding, and we are very good at lying to ourselves. So we got to walk that very thin line. Okay. Any thoughts, questions about this before we move on?
So that is like not likely happening on this chair of people, this side. Like they're telling them all the things.
Yes.
They're sharing everything.
Yeah, they're probably sharing everything. And even like in so like Eastern Orthodoxy, you go and you talk to like some Eastern Orthodox priests. Some of them will even say, hey, before you start, or I don't know exactly how this comes up in the conversation, but some of them will like kind of come in and say, like, hey, like before you begin, just know that whatever's the heaviest thing, that's what we want to deal with today. And so if they're like, so I'm sure that there's things that get forgotten. I'm sure that there's things where it's just like, this isn't real heavy. And then they get into the heavy thing, and then all of a sudden now you have a really good conversation in front of you. So, there's that element. But, yeah, I would say that the people on this side are probably going to be putting a name to their sin in some capacity. Now, I think that one of the ways that sin gets confessed in a lot of different circles is, and I'm going to be honest, I don't know how I feel about this. And this goes back to the detail. But I know for a fact that in a lot of circles that like the way that sin gets confessed is like, I struggled with, or I sinned to pride this week. I sinned to anger this week. I sinned to, whatever, lack of self-control, lust, all the different things. It's like this kind of this very general thing. And so I think that like maybe on the smaller things, like the people on this chair would be, hey, let me just go ahead and say like pride in general. Whereas they might put a little bit more attention and more detail to the things that are causing them the most consternation at that time. Good question. Any other thoughts? How often should I practice confession? There is no great answer for this, I think, and so I'm going to give you my experience, okay? If I go longer than 2 weeks, it's usually, if I go longer than 2 weeks, it is always hard to get back into the habit, and I find myself not being a very good confessor outside of like a 2 week time period. But so I would say at least every 2 weeks. At least every 2 weeks. Now, there's actually some science behind that. The science behind that is it takes 3 weeks to create a pattern or a habit. And so let's say you go 3 weeks without confessing and you start establishing this sinful pattern or behavior, and then you hit the 3 week mark. Well, now by the time you're confessing it, you have trained your brain to do this thing, and so now there's going to have to be more healing that takes place in your mind, heart, and in your body. So I would say that like definitely do not go further than 2 weeks, but I think that like a weekly confession is a positive thing. So I'd say between 1 and 2 weeks, try to get together. Any thoughts, questions on that? Jessica, what is that? You mind? Well, I put you on the spot. Sorry.
No, I don't mind. It's usually weekly.
Weekly. Okay. Cool. Anybody else got any experience with that? All right. So what does confession look like in my life? So I just want to share. So I'll be the first to say I don't think that I have reached the ideal. I told y'all when we started this, I don't think that I'm perfect in this practice. But I have been practicing this for quite some time, and I have seen the great benefit of it in my life. And I do think that I think I can honestly say that I am growing in transparency, but I think I can also honestly say that I'm not fully known either. So like there's just kind of giving you something to go off of there. But for me in my life, like I confess in every week. Try to on like either Tuesday or Wednesday. And so what it looks like for me is that I've got a list of yes or no questions. And this is not something native to me. This is something, I can't remember who it was. It was, Colson. His last name was Colson. Chuck Colson or something like that. Anyway, yeah, Chuck Colson kind of established this. But they're yes or no questions. And the questions are my questions. Your questions are probably going to look a little different for you. My questions are going to look a little bit different for me. And essentially, the questions are my questions because they are questions that, hey, these are things that are the most rooted in my life, where the most evil desire comes from. And then there's some things, too, that I would say just like all Christians need to be answering on a weekly basis. Like, hey, have you gossiped this week? Have you lied this week? Have you worked hard this week? Have you loved your spouse this week? Like, I think those are things that like all Christians need to be answering on a frequent basis. But I've got my questions. I can't remember what my list is up to now. It's like 18 or 19 questions. My final question is there anything else that you need prayers for healing for? And I usually use that space, so that's not a yes or no. That's like where I give detail. And so I'm usually going to use that space to either provide details for something that I answered yes or no to in my questions, or if there was something that needs to be addressed that wasn't in my questions, now I've got that space for that. And so I'm sending that actually like in a text message every week. Then every other week, Rick is going to check in with me, and we're going to go over the stuff from the last 2 weeks from that conversation. And so that's what it's looking like in my life right now. It has been a positive thing for me. It's been a very positive thing for me. I do 100% feel the call, feel the drift towards establishing something that is face-to-face, as I can't remember who asked it, but that is face-to-face, and that's something that is with folks who I'm doing life with here in Jacksonville. And so, I've been praying for that and even making steps in that direction, talking with some guys. And so, but yeah, that's what this whole kind of spiritual discipline of confession looks like for me. Again, as we're talking about detail, I'm not sharing like the details of like an intrusive thought or something like that. I tend to pretty much share, hey, these are the areas where like I sinned, like where I let something take root, and from that rootedness, I brought forth some fruit of sin. I don't know if that imagery looks good or not in your mind. Looks real good in my mind. But where I allowed the lie, where I not only wrestled with the lie, but I embraced the lie, adopted the lie as my own, and then took some step towards doing that. And I'll even say too, I think that sometimes there is sin. It kind of goes back to the hey, what if you confess and you feel okay about it, whatever. I think that there's sometimes where you might step into something where say if it's like a thought life, or maybe it's something that you're saying or that you're seeing or something along those lines, where it's just like, hey, there was only a second or two of impropriety there. There's only a second or two of sin there. That would typically be something that I would say, yeah, I'm probably not going to stress over that too much unless I really need to. And so, that's just like the pattern, and those are some areas of things that I'm kind of working towards in my own kind of confession life, or whatever you want to call that. I would love to hear if you guys have anything that you want to share about what this discipline looks like in your life. If you have any questions about what it looks like in mine, any critique, that's fine. I'm open to that because I don't think I do it perfectly. What do y'all got? We got 6 minutes left. So thoughts, comments, questions, concerns? Count down from 5 in my head.
So let's say you suffer from self-delusion. Okay, you don't realize you're sinning, and no one wants to say, hey, you're doing X, Y, and Z.
Mm.
What do you do in that situation?
What do you do if you're the
Or
person watching the self-delusional person, or what do you do if
let's say you're a self-delusional person.
Self-delusional person, okay.
We're I'm not, that's not sin, I'm not sinning.
Yeah.
And
I would say if that is, I would say that would probably be the circumstance where you need to start talking to somebody to really understand what's going on. I would say that that's an area where counselors can be very helpful. And I would say that that's an area where the mentor, the advanced mentor, the advanced spiritual guide would be very helpful to, because if there's self-delusion, if there's self-delusion and there is doubts in the self-delusion, so that means that there's conflict, right? A self-delusional person is not going to have any doubts about their actions. But if there's conflict there, then that means that hey, there could be something, there may not be, but there could be, and that would be the opportunity that I would say hey, get to start the process of transparency where you're being able to talk about these things more openly. It would be very helpful for that individual, and for the people who are looking at that individual. I would say hey, you gotta step up and do the tough thing and have the tough conversation of loving that person enough to confront that delusional behavior. But that would be the 2 things I'd say to that. that fair? Okay, follow. Is that, I mean, does that kind of answer the question? Or?
Yeah.
Yeah, we gotta be careful. And when you say self-delusional, like that is humans. Like we want to hide. We don't want to face consequences for the things that we do. And sometimes, you know, like depending on your personality and stuff, you can convince yourself that you're sinning when you're not. There's people who like. There's people who that's very much their story. Do you know who Martin Luther is? The Dutch reformer?
Yeah.
So very complicated figure in church history. But oftentimes he gets a really good name. In fact, tomorrow is Reformation Day. Although you thought it was Halloween, it's actually Reformation Day. There you go. Your life will be forever changed. Do what?
Happy Reformation Day.
But you know, like one of the things that like Martin Luther, and this is very well documented, is like he would spend hours in the confessional booth as a priest and as a monk, and like pretty much all of the people receiving his confession were like, "Dude, you gotta chill out. Like you're not even sinning right here. You know, like or if you are sinning, this is so small. Like you need to chill." And he just couldn't do it. He couldn't do it. He had a really tough time. And so I think he, you know, and so like there has been writings, and I can't remember, the Catholic Church calls that something. I like the word that they use. But whatever, there has been a lot of writing about people like that who have like, a lot of them are going to have like OCD tendencies and things like that, where they just like obsess over things that are either there or not there. And you know, I think the thing that we have to remember like with this too is like our beliefs are going to drive everything about us, right? So if somebody implants in you the belief that like, hey, everything that comes in your mind that is not godly is sin, well now, man, like if you believe that, if you actually believe that and adopt that for yourself, you are screwed. I mean, you will have no peace in life. Because like we have to acknowledge that there are demonic forces that have the ability to implant thoughts. We have to acknowledge that our brain, because of neuroplasticity, like there's going to be some things that we immediately think about or that we immediately go to, that it's not because we willed it or that we desired it or that's because that's what we want. It's just because like that's where the training is, right? And so like for those people there, it's like, well, hey, what do you do with that thought? And so, yeah, like we got to be careful, like with the delusionment. We also got to be careful with the, like there always seems to be like these radical parts on all sides. So like we got to be careful with like, you know, treating ourselves too harshly, but we also got to be careful with not treating our sin harsh enough. There's probably a lot more there than what you were asking for, but anyways. Any other thoughts, questions, comments before we go?
How do you come up with your list? Is it just something that you like gradually?
Yeah, I was like, what are the areas in my life that I suck? And you know, would make the questions that way.
Does your list change?
Yeah, it does. It does. It's never gotten shorter, unfortunately.
I was gonna say, like, do you ever feel like you can take away one of them? like you've grown far enough?
There's some questions that are on my. So I'll tell you.
Or
Like,
are they like yes?
no, so I mean like that. One of the
I'm
things.
thinking like if I'm having just a short list of
Yeah.
like my sins of choice, for
Mm.
like a better term, like they're all gonna say yes because that's why they're on my list because they're.
You'd be
the sins I
shocked
struggle
though.
with,
If you're filling out that list weekly, you'd be shocked. And one of the reasons that like things don't exit the list for me, and I don't even know, like I might just be processing this real time. So this might be
Real-time Kobe
this
time.
might be active, but I can tell you like there's some things on the list like now that like I can like say with integrity, no, I have not struggled here. And it is like freaking encouraging to like look back and be like, a year ago this was a yes, now it's a no. Praise God, you know. And so like I'm not gonna take it off the list. And also too, if it was a struggle a year ago, then that means that Satan saw some way to infiltrate my life there. And he never like he's a snake and he's wise and he's powerful, He's never just going to leave us alone. He's going to wait till that moment when we're most tired, we're most exhausted, we're most anxious, and boom, all of a sudden he's like, where the heck did that come from? So, yeah, like it needs to stay on there. But the list has gotten longer. And one of like the questions that is on my list that I answered yes to, or I answered the negative, whatever, I can't remember how I phrased it, but it's basically like, have you pursued joy in anything other than Christ this week? I have never been able to answer that positively. But one day I will. One day I will. Like, I just know. I know. It might be when I'm dead. I'll go find Rick. Rick, I don't know. Rick, he's like 65, but he's in really good shape. So maybe I'll die before him. Who knows? But maybe like in heaven one day I'll finally be able to go. Like, Rick, ask me. Come on, let's go. And I'll be like, no. But yeah, so maybe it's in heaven. But like I have hope that like on this earth I will get to that place of surrender where I'll be able to look somebody in the eye with integrity and say, no, this week I did not pursue joy in anything else other than Jesus Christ. And so I got to work towards that. Like, because it's on the list, it's in the back of my mind. Like before I told our Sunday school class this. I know nearly all, Robin's the only person, but I told y'all just about my weekend. Like I just did not do well in pursuing God this weekend, and I think it could be pretty safe to say that I was running from Him this weekend. But it was funny that like at one point in time I picked up my phone to watch a TV show, and in my mind I was like, I need to go do this. I need to go spend time in prayer. Like it's time to quit running. It's time to go spend time in prayer. And like in my mind, and this is where like the sin came in. Like in my mind, like I have that question in the back of my mind. I'm pursuing joy in something else right now. And so like there was like a struggle there. Unfortunately, I sinned, and I did not. I allowed the struggle to overcome, right? But there still was like it was good to have that question there. Any final thing before we go? This is where I would sort of encourage you. I encourage y'all the same way last week, and I want to encourage you the same way this week. Jesus, one of the last things He shared with His disciples before He went to the cross, hey, love one another. That's how it says in our English. Love one another as I have loved you. That's Jesus talking. But in the Greek, there's a nugget there that's so beautiful. He says, I'm going to give you a new commandment. What is His new commandment? His new commandment is to love one another. We're like, well, that's not new. But that's where the Greek comes in. Agape one another. Love one another unconditionally. And when you got somebody that's sitting across from you that loves you unconditionally, that's when we can be fully known, right? Like that's when we can be fully loved. That's a beautiful thing. So take steps. Whatever you got to do, take steps. Like don't let this session. I would say this right here: the last 2 weeks of the spiritual formation class, if you're going to do anything and actually apply it to your life, you got to do this. You got to start bringing in other people into the battle. Yeah, that's it. Let's pray for each other, and then let's get out of here. Lord Jesus in heaven, thank you that in your divine wisdom, you saw fit for us to confess to each other our sin, to bear one another's burdens. God, help us to participate in that. Help us to be people who receive confession well. Help us to be people who give confession well. This is hard. God, I think that this is the hardest thing you told us to do in your entire Bible. I would rather face my enemy and tell them I love them than face my closest friends and tell them my shame. But God, I know that you are with us, and I know that you care for us. So help us to love each other the way that you love us. In your name, amen. All right, let's roll.